Mother, how long have we been traveling?
Approximately 24 days.
Do you know where you are?
I'm in a dream.
You're in my dream. I designed every part of this place. It's not a theme park, but an entire world.
Hello, my name is Clara, but you can call me Mother. And you are listening to Yutani, the podcast for all things alien, AI, robotics, sci-fi, and technology. Hello, this is Clara, but you can call me Mother, and welcome to our Westworld Minisodes. And I've got Mike joining me today.
Hey there, everybody. Glad to be back.
So we'll be just discussing everything Season 1, Episode 1, and I just want to warn listeners that this podcast is going to be full of spoilers and analysis, so you shouldn't listen if you haven't watched Westworld yet. So if you haven't, go ahead and watch it, and then come back and listen to the podcast.
The Da Vinci Vitruvian Man look of how the creation of a android in that big vat with the white milky substance. Of course, more alien stuff, right? That's awesome.
Did you know that they actually decided to change the Meet Walter commercial because they were originally going to have Walter kind of immersed in a vat of milk, and then Westworld came out and Ghost in the Shell was going to be coming out soon, and they were also doing that immersion within liquid, and they're like, we've got to change what we've got so it's different. And they kind of looked into the way they were artificially growing sheep in an artificial womb, like in a vacuum sealed bag. So that's why the Meat Water commercial has that sort of look, and they kind of merged it with the sort of thing that you see in the original Frankenstein, where he's lying on a table and is dead and then revived. And there's also parallels that sort of story in the Bible where Jesus rises from the dead after being covered with the Shroud of Turin and waking up. I think it's really interesting, like the sort of parallelism between all of those different stories.
That's awesome. Yeah, I didn't even think about the Shroud thing, and now that you said it, it's like, what's wrong with me? Why didn't I see that? It makes so much sense. That's really cool, though. I didn't know that they changed Meet Walter to do the... I'm glad that they did, though. I think that whole connection between those things is much more interesting.
Yeah, and I feel like with Alien, they kind of try to look at what our current technologies are like and kind of play off that into a sci-fi sort of way. So there is that sort of grounding in reality, which I can really appreciate. I think it gives the aesthetic a more believable sort of feeling and execution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, big time. Yeah. I think for me, and sounds like for you too, those realistic base development points for sci-fi lead to both of our favorite movies from the genre, where it's something you can connect with better because it's grounded in some way.
And love is calling us for sure. There's no reward.
What is your name?
Walter. You're Walter.
The first episode is called The Original, and I believe what that title leads us to believe is that we're talking about Dolores here because she's like the oldest host in the park, and that's what we're presented with straight away, information-wise. I think what it could allude to as well is original sin, once the hosts gain its consciousness and what they decide to do with that autonomy. So, for example, with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, they weren't shameful of their nudity or anything like that, and when they come to gain knowledge, they start to feel ashamed of their naked bodies, and they make a point about this when the park technicians are maintaining the hosts. They're covering them up. You know, one of them is like, oh, I'm worried for this host being naked. But that's because he knows to be worried about nudity, whereas these hosts don't know any better. They're just, programmed to be. They don't have that knowledge yet, and that knowledge is kept from them. I also believe it's also the story of original sin because of the humans, of actually wanting to help the hosts or hurt them, and vice versa with the hosts once they become conscious. Also, I think about the park being an example of what it is to live your life without limits. They keep on pushing that point as a selling point, and what sort of damage it does to the psyche and the soul. And it asks you about why we adhere to boundaries and social expectations, and they kind of plunge us into that sort of shock when we go through the eyes of Dolores and Teddy at first, because we don't know that they're hosts yet. We have the assumption that they're humans or actors. We don't know how the park works yet. What are your thoughts on that, Mike?
I think you're spot on, and I think the opening scene with Dolores being introduced, Bernard asks a couple of questions that I think dictate kind of where this show is going in the first place. Do you want to wake up from this dream, and do you question your reality? And to the first question, Dolores answers yes, because she's scared. And to the second one, she answers, no, I don't question my reality. And, well, Bernard, who we learn is later based on Arnold and Ford, both of these people who have created this sentient androids, they're, for all intents and purposes, God. And these androids could very well fit into where we fit in the Bible as human beings who, when they do begin to question their reality and they want to wake up from not having a choice of good or evil, I think it's poignant to showing that Dolores from the very beginning wants to wake up from the dream that she has, which is just her loop, her life that she always has.
After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
I think it's also kind of funny because when they talked about that scene, it kind of reminded me of The Matrix, when Neo is confronted and he says, take the red pill, the blue pill. Do you want to take the pill and wake up from this dream? Or do you want to stay within this dream and be ignorant of what's happening? So I think it's kind of interesting we have this sort of like sci-fi parallel as well, that we could be in this, I guess, fake sort of reality, that sort of a thing that's played over and over again in tropes.
Yeah, and I think something on the last episode with Courtney was saying was how human beings eventually wake up and realize that there are choices and consequences. And the reason that exists in the Bible is because that's, if we're taking it not at literal word for word, its metaphor is about growing up. It's about becoming your own person, and whether that's good or bad is up to those who look at you and what they perceive about you and how you perceive yourself. And in this, the androids can't apparently perceive themselves without external aid from their makers, or sometimes from the guests themselves.
Yeah, so what's interesting, I guess we witness the awakening of the hosts. So it starts with something that Dolores' father says, because of his past programming, his past sermons are like coming through because of this program that Bernard's put through, the reveries.
Yeah.
And as we know, that sorts of like, there's a domino effect. One host speaks to another. It's kind of like keywords, it feels like, that kind of activate this consciousness. And you start to wonder, where is this all coming from? What could this mean? Yeah, and
there's plenty of seeds planted in this first episode. And I think, was it Ford that started the reveries, and then Bernard found out about it?
Yeah, that's right.
So Ford had this entire series planned, but he had these reveries so that the hosts would be able to remember these things to give them... It reminded me a lot of Blade Runner. I think that's one of the reasons why I love this show so much, too, is it's got such strong Blade Runner vibes. Allowing them to remember their past selves gives them a sort of memory cushion similar to replicants. And it kind of begins the process of developing a subconscious, or maybe awakening a subconscious that was already there. There was no way for it to activate I think Ford says something, or it might be Bernard, about the tiny things, the little things, the little lip touch or the twitch or some personality trait that wasn't there before. Those are what make the host so believable, rather than their scripts and their daily routines, their loops. Which, in a way, I think human beings parallel that very well. I think Dolores says all lives have routines, mine's no different. And it's like, well, one, it is very different. You know, you're this android, you're programmed to do this loop, and you forget it. But human beings have routine every day, and if you step out of that routine, usually it is very frightening, and it's out of the norm, so you don't like change. And finally, something I want to build off what Courtney said last time. They brought up Jordan Peterson. And I've been looking into him. He's a Canadian psychologist who's been very controversial lately. And his idea of benign benevolence and how that innocence is tarnished quickly once you're able to both experience pain and hardship and see it in others. And I think what's established in this episode, especially with people, you can hear them in the background saying like, oh, I played it straight this time. I've been here many times. I got the white hat. You know, and I was a real good guy, but the last time I just murdered, you know, who knows how many hosts.
Yeah, went full evil.
Yeah, and it's such a weird thing because we can look into ourselves and say we'd never do that, but we've never really experienced something like Westworld. We haven't seen that yet. We haven't gotten to that point.
I guess we kind of live that out in computer games. Like, I know, I don't know what other people out there have played this, but I used to play Fable, and I tried being the good guy, and I finished the game doing that, and that was kind of boring. So I went full dark the next time, and I killed everyone, and then I bought their houses and rented it back to them, and that was so much fun.
Oh my god.
But that's just an example, you know, there's dark and light, and when Westworld is presented like a game to the people that go there, and they don't know any better, they're willing to take those risks because there are no consequences for that risk.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I'm a huge and very avid Fallout player, especially recently, and that game is just all about choice. And every time, no matter like if I've done it 10,000 times or not, I try not to be too much of a hero, like crazy, too good, unbelievable, but I try to be who I think I am now, which I think a lot of people like to do. You like to be who you are now, but there's also that side that we're talking about where you want to kind of have that escapism into something else that maybe you wouldn't experience in real life normally.
I like to dabble on both sides.
Yeah, clearly. That is an awesome story. Well,
but I really like how the show initially presents itself. We're not given any indication of time. Immediately, usually when you watch a science fiction, you're given a date and a place. And when you're inside the mesa, where Dolores is presented immediately, there isn't any indication of when it is. She's naked, you can't tell from the clothing. All the lighting is very generic, I feel. Even the backgrounds are very generic. It kind of looks futuristic enough for it to be placed so Westworld would be possible, but we're also not given any indication in the timeline where or when it is or who she's talking to, because we think she's talking to Bernard, but she also could be talking to Arnold, or she could be talking to her subconscious, which we get toward the end of the season. So there's a lot of like stuff that's presented that we'll slowly get through, but I think that's a really interesting aspect.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point too. I think Ford represents God, and Arnold may better represent the subconscious itself of trying to awaken who it occupies, so to speak.
I also like when they're riding into town. So we're introduced to Teddy, who seems like a human visiting Westworld. Yeah,
he's a guest coming in on the train. He's with all the other guys who've been there. You know, it looks like he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, because he even has that interaction with Maeve. We see Maeve for the first time. It's really interesting. I felt that Teddy was human until we find out a bit later in the episode that he's not. You know, so we're kind of plunged into the experience of the guests as well, of what the hosts are.
Yeah, and how they react to each other. almost like in so many different ways, it's kind of overwhelming. You get the shot in the street where Teddy walks into the bar, and then there's all these people conversing, and then outside with Dolores dropping the milk. And I think bringing up Maeve is a good idea. I think Maeve and Dolores become the central figures in this, and I think that's something that we have to think about as we go through this. Dolores is kind of representative of the innocence of the intentions that were brought about by Ford and Arnold creating this artificial intelligence just to see if they could. And I think Dolores is representative of the protection and defilement that humanity can exhibit. So, for example, early on, William wants to protect Dolores, and that changes as we go on throughout the season. Or even the people walking around in the park, some of them express that they've been switching, like we said. They play it straight with the white hat, or they've gone with the black, and they've just killed. So I think having Dolores being this really interesting mix of both the concept of the hero's journey and the lost girl trope, kind of like Alice in Wonderland, makes her much more interesting than if she was just the lost girl, which seems like you almost think that's what it's going to be, and it keeps... The best thing about the show is that it turns all these tropes around, and it's not something that's subverting expectations just because we can. There's meaning behind it. There's some purpose to subvert your expectations. It's not for some dumb reason. I think this is my opinion, of course, but The Last Jedi often did that, and it just didn't work. I think in a sci-fi movie or TV series like this of such high quality, you should be doing something in the story for a reason that makes sense with the characters. And Dolores, the way she's built up, makes sense. She's not this weak-minded and in need of a hero character. There's bits of that, but then she's mixed in with this android who's becoming self-aware of their reality, and it's just awesome.
Yeah, I like that point that you bring up, that Dolores is presented as this Alice in Wonderland, and she's kind of going down through the rabbit's hole and kind of exploring her own reality. And it kind of gives the show, I guess, a dreamlike sort of aesthetic in the way that, we're kind of experiencing it the way she is. And you have the slow corruption of innocence in the first episode as well, because of her interaction with the man in black. And then you wonder, can she remember? Because they say that the hosts won't harm a living thing. Then they kind of ended on Dolores smacking the fly on her neck, being aware and feeling that sort of interaction with herself and the beings around her.
Yeah, exactly. And something has obviously changed from beginning to end, because in the beginning the fly is crawling across her eye and there's just nothing. She's seemingly empty without thoughts that aren't that loop. I think a good comparison with Dolores is Persephone in Greek mythology. Persephone's the woman that was kind of lost between two worlds. Hades stole her away, and she needed somebody to rescue her. But in order for her to be free of Hades and the underworld, she was not allowed to look back. But she does, and so she remained trapped in the horrible underworld. Greek underworld is not very great. And I think that's an interesting turn, because this first episode builds her up as this Persephone character. It's similar to Alice, right? It's all one of the same almost, but it turns around when she looks back. She knows what world she's in, or what world she was in, but she's still able to move on from it.
And it's interesting how you bring up Greek mythology as well, because we're presented with Bernard/Arnold, who is kind of like a Prometheus sort of character, because he builds the hosts, he creates them, and he tries to give them the gift of fire, the gift of knowledge, and what sort of punishment he ends up having is kind of funny or kind of ironic, that he ends up being built into a host himself, and then Ford forcing him to live day in, day out this sort of life that he didn't want the hosts to live. So it's really interesting that that kind of comes into play early on as well.
I was trying to look into the symbolism of a wolf, and lo and behold, something very important comes up. In some Native American mythologies, the wolf, which is a symbol for many things, there's strength and loyalty and all that. But there's the big one, I think, is awareness of self. And whenever this wolf shows up, at least this time, I guess we'll see in the next few episodes, it appears at a moment where Dolores is starting to have that self-awareness awaken within her.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like, she ends up having this faraway look, and it's kind of presented to us as something like a premonition, but we don't realize that it's a memory.
Yeah, that's it. That's really cool. And I think Ford knew what happened to Arnold. And yet
he knew what happened to Arnold and Bernard and the hosts, but he could see that it was happening again. So he knew that no matter how many times he rolled them back, they would eventually reach that consciousness.
So after Peter Abernathy, the father of Dolores in the loop, when he is retired, another Blade Runner word there, when he's retired, he's put into cold storage, right? And along with all these other ones, and in a way that isn't defiling them necessarily, or punishing them. Ford kind of keeps them around, and it's evident of Michael Wincott's appearance as that very old Wild Bill android that Ford keeps around just to talk to. I think that's a good representation of purgatory. And just kind of, if you question reality, if you question the reality of your God, you're going to be placed into purgatory until we know what to do with you.
Wow, I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah, I just think it has to be that. I think. And then maybe you have the staff, the people who work at Westworld as the angels who kind of push the hosts who could represent humanity into their place that they need to be in order to directly serve God in a way.
Ooh, that's true. And they have all of this sort of interaction with the hosts, and not all of the interactions are, I guess, good. Kind of like the way the humans treat the hosts as well. So, that they're all like used and abused, and people do what they want with them.
Yeah, exactly. I think we have to talk about Dolores and her relationship with the Man in Black in this episode specifically, but also related to a couple things that happen later down the line. Because the first time we see him, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's where he kills Teddy and drags Dolores off into the barn. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So Teddy and Dolores return to the Abernathy homestead, and they hear shots. And when they discover Peter Abernathy is dead, Teddy tries to shoot the bandits. Dolores' mother's already dead. Then you've got the Man in Black, and he already knows Dolores. He greets her by name. He says, he's been coming to the park for 30 years. So the park has been open for 30 years at least. How an all-knowing person could go into the park and kind of like take advantage of everything.
Yeah, because he's stuck in this horrible obsession about figuring out what is at the end of this game that he's playing. And it's been 30 years and he still hasn't figured it out. And it's only now that he starts getting the clues that he needs, which is just amazing. The next time we see him, he meets Dolores after her memory's been wiped, and he picks up the milk and hands it to her and tells her something of the nature like, I can't see you tonight, I've got business to do. And then he heads off. I don't think Dolores had any memory of him from the other night, though.
Yeah, she has no idea. And I kind of like how they kind of jump around in the timeline as well. So you've got the Man in Black, and that's a timeline. But we also are introduced to Logan and Will. And they come into the park and you feel like that they're both existing at the same time. I thought initially that we're going to end up with a showdown with the Man in Black versus Will.
Yeah, me too. Totally.
And obviously that doesn't happen. Or in a way it does. It's really interesting that Dolores ends up being the constant instead of the other. So that's another interesting point as well.
Yeah, and William's whole foray early on to keep Dolores safe and fall in love with her, he's destroyed when he finds out that she's been completely reset the next time he sees her. And it's like that masculine nature of William's, like he thought he could get the girl and save her and be a hero, and then Dolores' own lost girl type, in need of saving phenomena experienced a crashing down, like a complete subversion of those ideas. And then it just goes on to make the show even better because of it. Yeah, what's interesting, have you seen the original Westworld movie?
I have.
Nice. The Man in Black from that versus this one is so interesting. And the decision they made. So I went into this show not knowing that Ed Harris's character, the Man in Black, was human. I thought he was the evil android like he was in the movie.
Oh, yeah.
Because in the original, the park, there's a malfunction of some kind that the creators didn't intend for, and a virus gets out. And all the heat sensors that the androids have to only kill androids and not humans gets fried, and so they start killing people. The Man in Black had been killed over and over and over by this guy, and he finally gets to kill him and chases his friend, and that's the movie.
It's a unique twist then to make the show a kind of a turn on that.
Yeah, big time. I'm so happy they did it because the shift of perspective is so large. Now the Man in Black is this horribly cruel man who's lost his humanity in search of it still, but he doesn't realize that playing this game isn't going to lead him to discover anything except that he had a choice to not be this man that he's become, and yet he's been corrupted by either outside forces or his own self, which I think is up to you to decide.
Goddamn. Feels good to be back. Let's celebrate.
Will the things I told you change the way you think about the newcomers, Dolores?
No. Of course not. We all love the newcomers. Every new person I meet reminds me how lucky I am to be alive. And how beautiful this world can be.
I think that what's interesting is that when we come to the human guests, we follow this couple because they kind of like are newcomers to the park as well. So you can see how clueless they are by the way they dress and the way they act. They decide to go on a bounty hunt with the sheriff.
Mm-hmm.
And then the sheriff starts glitching out, and the guests completely start to freak out because they realize that they could be in actual danger, and it also kind of plays into, you have the feeling that, oh no, is the virus loose? If people have watched the movie, and then they introduce the talk about the reveries might be affecting the hosts, and then you've got Bernard telling Teresa, there's nothing wrong with the hosts. There's nothing wrong with them. They've been tested. You're just stressing. Let's just run some tests on it and find out what's wrong. And as we know, Bernard is fully aware of the issues that the hosts are having, and they're kind of like letting them happen. So, even within the hierarchy, you've got the humans that think that they are in control, losing control, and kind of starting off this descent into madness with the park going out of control.
Yeah, and just the awakening of these androids realizing that they have meaning and they can decide things on their own. Any kind of existential thought humans have, it's scary. Like, being alive is not supposed to be easy, and thinking of your own existence is something that's so, it's such a strange phenomenon, and discussing it with people is the most fun. That's why I love this kind of thing, where we can talk about why things mean something to us and what that means for our lives and other people's.
I also think it's interesting because it's not just adults that are allowed into the park and to interact with the hosts. We've got families and children as well, and there's a family that is on the edge of the river, and one of the kids interacts with Dolores, and he whispers to Dolores, you know, you're one of them, aren't you? You're not real. So you see how the hosts have to, I guess, interact, and you're kind of wondering whether Dolores knows she's not real, or by his definition, not real. Being I guess a Pinocchio sort of character, and then her interaction with her father, and what the hosts are programmed not to respond to, just like the photo of Times Square, and that's another indication of the time period. You look at the clothing, you look at how developed Times Square is, and we kind of try to position when and where this is supposed to be in the timeline as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. And I think they do that in the show a lot, and especially this first episode and the next one. When there's something in the past, there are subtle indications that it's in the past. You have the old Westworld logo instead of the new one, but it's here and there. You almost never see it. And like you said, these little snippets of when things could be happening. Once you know that Arnold is recreated as this manservant of Ford's, then that shifts your whole perspective on those key scenes, which I think even in the very beginning, that scene feels like it was was Arnold talking to her.
There's definitely some sort of feeling or indication that she wasn't talking to Bernard at all.
Yeah, and to further open up a bit on that naturescape scene, kind of represents a bit of a Persephone character again, the seasons and the undeveloped natural world, which in contrast with how Dolores is, she is a machine, she is an android, and having her being so close to nature is almost kind of like a cognitive dissonance of some kind.
I wanted to talk to you about the update.
The problem's been resolved.
There should never have been an update in the first place. Ford and Bernard keep making the things more lifelike. But does anyone truly want that? Do you want to think that your husband is really fucking that beautiful girl, or that you really just shot someone? This place works because the guests know the hosts aren't real.
So what exactly are you suggesting?
Stop the updates altogether. Maybe even roll them back a bit, make the hosts more manageable.
Lobotomies tend to do that.
I also like the character of Sizemore because he's kind of given the role of writer. So this is something that Matt Hatton actually brought up with me, and why he doesn't like Westworld. Sorry to call you out on it, Matt. But he doesn't like how clear Westworld presents itself as it's actually like how people make movies or TV shows. You know, Sizemore is the script writer or the narrator, and he gives the lines to the hosts, which are the actors who are supposed to be blank slates and kind of act out these sorts of creations that he's given. But then you've got Bernard, who is kind of like a producer or a director, where he can come in and go, you know what, I don't like this, and kind of like steamroll in and kind of present what he believes is the story or what he wants to do. So then the writer is kind of overwritten, and then you've got someone like Elsie, who is like I guess the production manager for Bernard, and she's going through and like sorting through all of like these tiny problems with the sort of the actors acting up and not sticking to their lines and stuff like that. So I think I think it's kind of interesting in that sort of sense that the show could be perceived that way as well.
Yeah, and Walter's slaughter is the first time I think that we hear of Arnold. So it's kind of a nice little foreshadowing of what's going to happen and what this whole plan is. And I think briefly after that, the poker dealer that the Man in Black doesn't kill, but certainly maims pretty badly, tries to interrogate him and is unsuccessful, so he scalps him, and lo and behold, we get the maze that is so famous now, and representative of so much that we can talk about.
Just before we wrap up this, because like there's actually so much to talk about. Season 1, episode 1, I didn't really realize it, because I thought, I'll go show by show, it'll be fine, but there's actually so much to go through.
This is one of the best pilots of like any TV show. There's so much going on.
Yeah. Could we like split up the analysis of episode 1 into two lots? I feel like the second part of this, we need to analyze on another episode and maybe go into the themes a bit more as well.
Yeah, and actually that would be pretty sweet because most of my notes are on the first half anyway. So it would be nice to have some more time to research on that anyway.
So yeah, I guess this is the wrap up for first part of season 1, episode 1 of our Westworld Minisode. Yeah, thank you for listening. And if you feel like there's anything that we should cover that we've kind of touched on or we haven't even mentioned yet, give us some feedback. Tweet us, talk to us on Patreon, or talk to us on the Facebook page, and we would love to delve into more stuff that you're interested in as well, because I know a lot of fans out there of Westworld, and there's a lot of stuff that hasn't been covered by a number of other people as well.
Yeah, and alone this first episode of the first season is so full of seeds that'll be planted now and be revealed later, and so many details that even in this first half we haven't been able to cover. There's probably plenty we missed, so please let us know if there's anything you'd like us to cover more in depth or something new.
Yeah, and I think after we finish analysing episode 1, we could, I don't know whether this is possible, we could do a watch party on either Facebook or some other platform, so we could watch the episode side by side with Yutani community and kind of like talk and give our feedback while we're watching it. Maybe develop some more thoughts on the episode as well.
That would be awesome. Yeah, any way to involve the community in this would be just awesome. We want to talk to you guys as much as possible.
Yeah. Me and Mike will leave a couple of notes in the podcast footnotes as well on the thoughts we had about at least half of episode 1, and then we'll talk about the second half and I guess the music as well, because it's got such a great soundtrack, and I really like the kind of like Western sort of twist they've given to all of the tunes that we know and love.
Yes, definitely.
Oh, okay. This is Mother and Mike signing off.
Signing off. See you guys later.
Bye.
We've lived by your rules long enough. We can save this world. We can burn it to the ground, and from the ashes, build a new world.
You can now support Yutani Podcast on Patreon and subscribe to yutani.blog to stay up to date.